Welcome to LTV's Israel Daily. I'm Amita Rari, and coming up in today's newscast, U.S. President Joe Biden urging Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to walk away from further judicial overhaul plans. Meantime, the Mossad helping Greece to uncover a terror plot against Israelis in Athens. And later, a 9-year-old New York boy opening his very own Matzah Pizza business ahead of Passover. U.S. President Joe Biden publicly urged Prime Minister Netanyahu to walk away from Israel's controversial judicial overhaul plan. It was a rare public rebuke from the U.S. leader, and Netanyahu was quick to respond. LTV Steve Leibovitz reports.
In a rare public rebuke, President Biden said he was very concerned about the health of the Israeli democracy and warned that Israel cannot continue down this road. In an exchange with reporters before entering the White House, Biden was asked if Israel is at an inflection point and said this.
Well, I don't know they're at an inflection point, but I think it's a difficult spot to be in, and they got to work it out.
And what do you hope the Prime Minister will do on that particular law?
I hope he walks away from it.
While walking away, Biden responded no when asked whether he would be inviting Netanyahu to the White House, and then added, not in the near term. Earlier, before boarding Air Force One, Biden had an exchange with reporters and had this to say.
Like many strong supporters of Israel, I'm very concerned. And I'm concerned that they get this straight. They cannot continue down this road. And I've sort of made that clear. Hopefully the Prime Minister will act in a way that he's going to try to work out some genuine compromise, but that remains to be seen. We're not interfering. They know my position. They know America's position. They know the American Jewish position. Anyway.
Netanyahu quickly responded by insisting that he was seeking to restore the proper balance between the three branches of government via consensus. The Prime Minister rebuffed Biden's comments, saying that Israel would not make decisions based on overseas pressure, even from the best of friends. In his statement to Biden, Netanyahu said, I have known President Biden for over 40 years, and I appreciate his long-standing commitment to Israel. The alliance between Israel and the United States is unbreakable and always overcomes the occasional disagreements between us.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying today that Israel will enter the U.S. visa waiver program in September. Netanyahu thanked the chairman of the coalition, Ophir Katz, National Security Advisor Tzachi Hanegbi, and the Knesset Speaker Amir Ohana for promoting the project quickly and efficiently. Earlier this week, the Knesset approved a draft law allowing the United States to access data of Israelis for visa exemption. The law will authorize the Israeli police to transfer identifying information, such as fingerprints, to organizations recognized in the United States. Netanyahu adding, in the coming months, we will fulfill the additional requirements, and in September 2023, the State of Israel is expected to enter the list of visa-exempt countries for the USA. Judicial reform negotiations got underway at the president's residence. Just one day after Netanyahu announced a pause in the government's planned overhaul, teams from the coalition and the opposition met for the first time. The first round of talks last night concluded after 1 hour and, according to the president's spokesman, were held in good spirits. The talks came after more than 12 weeks of mass protests. Judicial reform negotiations got underway at the president's residence just one day after the Prime Minister Netanyahu announced a pause in the government's planned overhaul, allowing teams from the coalition and opposition to answer the president's call and meet for the first time. Negotiating teams representing the coalition and the opposition were announced before the talks. For the opposition, National Union's MKs Gidon Saar, Chilit Roper, Orit Farkas-Cohen, and attorney Ronen Aviani. Yesh Atid MKs Orna Barbivai and Karin Elarar, former Director General of the Prime Minister's Office Naama Schultz, and attorney Oded Gazit. The Likud's team of negotiators includes Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, Cabinet Secretary Yossi Fuchs, and Dr. Aviad Bakshi, head of the legal department at the Kohelet Forum, and Professor Talia Einhorn. Talks are continuing today. Prime Minister Netanyahu on Monday night told the nation that the pause would last until the next Knesset session in a month's time to give negotiations a chance to reach a compromise. So we know the news is fast-paced, and we want to let you know that ILTV's new app is now available. So if you want to stay connected to the latest news from Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, download our app now on all your devices. It's available in the App Store for both Android and iPhone. Now, we are fortunate to have with us today Dr. Gerald Steinberg, head of NGO Monitor and an expert on U.S.-Israel relations, as well as the art of negotiations. Dr. Steinberg, hi, nice to meet you. Now, hello. Now, let's start with the U.S. tongue-lashing of Netanyahu and the Prime Minister's tough response. Your thoughts on this?
Well, I think it would have been helpful not to have those statements made by President Biden at this time. We've had a major change here in the last, let's say, 24, 48 hours, and it would have been good for President Biden to acknowledge the progress, the negotiations, the agreement or the statement by Prime Minister Netanyahu not to pursue unilateral legislation, at least for the next month. Well, those are all things that President Biden could have praised. So I think that what we heard from Biden was something that maybe he had thought about, prepared a few days ago, and wasn't really caught up to the recent events, and that's unfortunate.
Gerald, why do you think that Biden went public at this time?
It's hard to tell, and I think maybe because he got some bad information as of a few days ago, as of, let's say, 48 hours ago, in fact, we had large numbers of people in the streets demonstrating, mostly against the reform. There was a counter demonstration in favor of it, and there was some clashes. The country was really in bad shape. We were really in gridlock, and I think it was important that the changes were made, and it's perhaps at that stage of 48 hours ago that President Biden decided that it was time to put more pressure on Mr. Netanyahu to take responsibility as the prime minister and try to bring Israel out of this gridlock. But in fact, that's what's already happened. So it's hard to tell what the motives were or the timing, unless it was just something that he got bad advice on.
But still, it's interesting to understand how closely does the White House really follow the protests and everything that happened here. I mean, they're talking a lot. We're hearing a lot of criticism and harsh criticism, but how closely is Biden, the whole White House, really following what's happening here?
Well, the White House, the State Department, Secretary of State Blinken, and other key people have a lot on their plate. They've got to deal with the ongoing war in Ukraine and Mr. Putin in Russia and all the threats that are involved in that. And then they also have issues dealing with China that are becoming increasingly important, and the American role in the Asia-Pacific. In some ways, I think what's going on in Israel is not even just secondary. It's tertiary. It's not something that is of extreme importance to the security of the United States, but because of this long relationship between both the United States and Israel, and also the individuals, President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu have had a long relationship. So that, I think, brings it up higher on the list. And the concerns is also pressure from American Jewish leaders who are more against the reform or against the government. And then those are within the Democratic Party. There were voices like that. So it's not clear what the process was. It's also, we've got the major media in the United States clearly has an impact on what's heard and seen in the White House. And I don't know if President Biden reads the headlines in the New York Times, but they've had reams and reams of column inches on what's going on in Israel, not always particularly nuanced in terms of the different issues. I'm not sure how much the White House understands, or Mr. Biden understands, that there really is support for significant judicial reform, and that's a real issue. And all the headlines, that misleading headlines about this being a coup or anti-democratic, were problematic. But of course, the way it was handled is also very problematic.